Hey everyone. We had some technical difficulties on Sunday night recording the lesson, so that's why we look a little bit different today. But it was actually a pretty short lesson, so no problem going over it again here for a few minutes. And then if you're doing the momentum packets at the end, I have a little assignment for you, something that we did in small groups on Sunday night. But we're continuing our study in 1 Corinthians, and we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and the chapter is all about love, which is an important topic for us to talk about because our culture can be kind of misleading on this and doesn't always give us a full picture of what love is. That if we look at and think about the movies that we watch, the TV shows we watch, the music that we often listen to, love in our culture is most often portrayed as this romantic thing. That love is all about romance, and that love ultimately culminates, it ultimately comes to its full conclusion in physical intimacy and in sex. And so love becomes all about romance and all about sex. And we talked a couple weeks ago about that God had created and God designed marriage and God designed sex as part of marriage, and that as a husband and wife they get married, they grow in emotional intimacy with each other, they grow in spiritual intimacy with each other, and then that culminates in physical intimacy, that sex part of the marriage relationship. And that is a type of love, a part of love, but it's just a very narrow picture of love. The love is a much broader thing than just between a husband and wife, or even just between a father and son, or a mother and daughter, a parent and child. That love is something as Christians that should be involved in all of our relationships. It should spread through every interaction that we have. And actually, 1 Corinthians 13, this beautiful chapter describing what love is, Paul puts it in the midst of a conversation about the church. It's not in the midst of a conversation about relationships or marriage. It's in the midst of him talking about the church, that he's explained what church is and what our role in church is. And he says, I got to stop for a moment and draw you a picture, explain what love really is. And I don't know about you, but when I think of romance, I don't necessarily think of church. Right? I don't go to my wife, honey, we need to have a romantic night together. Let's go to youth group. Right? I love our teens. I love hanging with you guys, but it's not a romantic time. And so when I think of the church, I don't think romance, but that's the context where Paul says, I got to stop and I have to explain to you what love is. And so my big point there is just that love is much broader and involves much more relationships and just romance and just marriage and just dating relationships. That love is all about all of our relationships. And if we want to be good Christians, if we want to serve Jesus well, then love has to be a big part of that. And actually, we talked last week, or on the previous video, if you're watching these online, we talked a little bit about spiritual gifts. That God has given each and every Christian, if you put your faith and trust in Jesus, God has given you a spiritual gift. He's given you some ability, something that you can do, and He wants us to use those things to serve Jesus and to serve others. Right? We're to use those things to serve God and to serve others. But like most things that we've talked about in 1 Corinthians, the Corinthians kind of messed things up with spiritual gifts. They got some stuff wrong. We talked way back at the beginning of 1 Corinthians that one of the big struggles of the Corinthian people was pride. And so when they figured out, when they started to see that they have these spiritual gifts, these abilities from God, they started to become prideful about them. They started to go, oh, I've been gifted with this. this is awesome. That's nice that you can do that thing over there. You can care for people, but I can sing and make worship music for God. That's way better. And they started to rank spiritual gifts and started to be prideful and make the gifts about them and puffing themselves up and pumping themselves up. And so at the end of 1 Corinthians 12, in the last verse, verse 31, after Paul talks about spiritual gifts, he says to the Corinthians, "But earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way." That Paul says it's good that you desire to have these gifts. It's good that you desire to use these abilities that God has given you. It's good that you want to do these big things. But if it's all about you, Paul says, I want to show you a better way to do it. I want to show you a more excellent way. That there should be a different and a better motive to using our gifts than to say, hey, look at me, look how awesome I am, look at what God has gifted me to do. And Paul explains that more excellent way in 1 Corinthians 13, starting at verse 1. "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing." And so Paul lists all these examples of all these amazing things, and he says, if you could do these amazing things, but if you don't do them in love, then it really doesn't matter. It's really not as effective or beneficial. You're not making that much of an impact. Even though these things are amazing, if it's not done in love, then you're missing the point, and you're not actually making the impact that you could be, or maybe not even making any real impact at all. I mean, look at some of these examples. It says about speaking the tongues of men and of angels. We won't get too deep into tongues today, but just as an example, he's just talking about if you spoke in a different language that you don't know. So say, for instance, somebody walked into church, right, and somebody goes up to them and starts speaking to them in a different language. Right? Maybe it's a Ukrainian refugee comes into church, and somebody goes up and starts speaking to them in Ukrainian. And they don't know Ukrainian, they've never studied Ukrainian, but they start to speak to this Ukrainian person in their own language. Like, that would be an incredible thing, right? An incredible miracle, incredible gift from God. But Paul said if it's just about pumping you up, if it's just about that person going, man, look at me, I can speak Ukrainian now, and it's not about actually loving that Ukrainian person, wanting to make them feel welcome and part of the group, if it's not done in love, Paul says, then it's just noise. It's not really beneficial. Right? Another one he says in there, if you understood all mysteries and all knowledge. Right? Think of that. Somebody understood and knew everything. Right? We no longer Google it to find out the answer to our question. Right? Instead of Googling it, we go over to that person and we go, hey, what's the answer to this? And they tell us and explain it all to us. They know everything. Like, that would be crazy. But Paul says if they're not using that knowledge in love, if they're not using that knowledge to care for other people, then it's meaningless. It's worthless. It's just about them pumping themselves up, going, man, look how smart I am. Paul says it's worthless. If it's not used in love, if it's not directed toward another person. Even in verse 3, he says, if I deliver my body up to be burned. Right? Think about that. If you jumped out and took a bullet for somebody, gave up your life for them, Paul says if you're not doing that in love, then it's not worth anything. It's worthless, or at least not as valuable as it could be. Right? If you're just jumping in front of that bullet, going, look at me, I'm a hero, build a monument to me. Paul says, rather, it should be done in love. That you're sacrificing yourself or a part of yourself because you really care about that other person you're making that sacrifice for. And so the big point of all of this is Paul says that we can do all this crazy, awesome stuff, and maybe in your life you're going to do some crazy, awesome stuff, but if you're not doing it in love, if your motivation is not love for that other person, then it doesn't matter. Or at least it's not as impactful as it could be. And this is an important thing for us to keep in mind, because it's something, even for myself, that I need to check my own motives a lot of times. It's easy for me to drift away, even in the good things that I'm doing, to drift away from a motive and a focus on love and on the other person. Personally, for me, it's easy for me to get caught up and busy, and I'm just checking things off the list. Teach the youth lesson, plan the event, I got to meet with this person, I'm just check, completing tasks, and I lose focus on, I'm actually doing this stuff because I love this other person, or I love this group of people, and I actually want to help them and want to benefit their lives and do something that's going to make them and their life and their eternity better. It's easy for me just to get caught up in doing it and checking the boxes and getting it done, and then I have to refocus myself on, okay, this is really about loving other people, and I need to be focused on the other as I'm doing that. And so it's really easy for us to drift our focus from love. Right? Maybe our focus just becomes, I got to do this so I can build my resume, or I got to do this so people will think I'm a good person. Whatever that ulterior motive that focuses it on us, we need to work on getting rid of that motive and moving from that motive to an actual motive of love and care and doing this for the other person. Paul said that's really why God gave us these gifts. Not to pump ourselves up and puff ourselves up, but to help the other person. Another way that I have to think about this at times is specifically sometimes when I get asked to speak at other events. I'll get asked to speak at an event or speak to a group that I don't normally get to speak to, and there's always a temptation in my mind as I'm preparing and as I'm thinking about speaking at this event to be like, man, I got to make this really good so that these people think I'm an awesome speaker and I'm super smart and I'm a great communicator, and my motives start to be on, let's make this thing great so that people think I'm great. And I have to fight that temptation, and I have to refocus with the help of God, with the help of Jesus, refocus my motives on, no, I'm doing this, I'm speaking at this event, I'm speaking to this group, not so they can be impressed with me, but I'm speaking to them because I want to share God's word with them, because I love them and I want to share something with them that's going to be beneficial to them, that's going to help them in this life and in eternity. And I ought to make my focus not about making myself impressive, but sharing Jesus and sharing God's love with them. And so the challenge today is really to think about, in the good things that you're doing, why are you doing them? Is your motivation love? Are you really loving the person or the people that you're serving and that you're doing these good things to? Are you using the gifts that God has given you, the abilities that God has given you, just to puff yourself up, or to actually love and care for other people? And this idea of love and doing things in love, it's so important. And I think verse 8 of 1 Corinthians 13 really hits on why it's important we do these things in love. It says there in verse 8, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. And the important part there is that love never ends. Because see, here's the thing. Our gifts, for a time, we're going to, when you're younger, you start to develop your gifts, your abilities, and you improve and you get better at doing those things God's given you to do. But then at a certain point, your gifts start to decline. It happens to everyone. As we get older, we get to a certain point where we just can't do what we used to do, and our gifts decline. Our gifts start to fade away. And they don't last forever. And then even when we use our gifts today, the good works that we do, a lot of times those specific good works get forgotten. It may be some big things that people have done for you, you remember, but a lot of stuff, especially even good things that people have done for you, you don't always remember all the details. Just think about it. Think about a parent, a grandparent, somebody that you really love, and you can maybe think of some specific things that they've done recently, maybe think of some general things they do for you on a regular basis, but there's probably a lot of good things that they have done for you that you forgot totally about. Or at least you forget about the details of those things. Right? Our ability to do good works, to use God's gifts, fade when we get older. The good works themselves that we do, they fade in people's memories. But here's the thing. When we do those things in love, when we build up love between ourselves and another person, when we build up love between somebody and Jesus, that love that we build up, it lasts and it stays. Right? Again, think of that parent, that grandparent that you love. You might not remember all the stuff that they've done for you, but you remember that they loved you and that you love them, and that love that you've built between each other, it lasts and it sticks. My dad passed away 5 years ago now, and I still love him as much now as I did before he passed away. Right? He's been gone 5 years. He hasn't done a good work for me in 5 years. And some of the stuff that he's done for me has faded from my memory, but that love that we had, it's still there. It's still as real and still as powerful as it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 15 years ago. When we build that love between ourselves and other people, that's something that lasts. That's something that sticks. And when we point people to Jesus and help them to love Jesus, that's a love that lasts for eternity. And so our gifts are awesome. Our abilities are awesome. You're going to do some awesome stuff throughout your life for God. And you're going to see Him do amazing stuff if you follow Him and serve Him and use what He's given you. But remember, it's not all about doing those awesome things, and definitely not about doing them for your glory, but it's about the love that you share and the love that you build, and that is the thing that's going to last. And especially when we can point people to the love of Jesus, that's really going to last for all of eternity. And so again, I challenge you, think about your motives. Why do you do what you do? Why are you doing those good works? Is it really out of love for that other person? Because love is the thing that never ends. And so if our motive is supposed to be love, then we need to know what love is. And Paul does a pretty awesome job of outlining and describing something that's really hard to describe. And in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7, Paul lays out a bunch of terms and expressions to try and describe and help us understand what love really is and what love isn't as well. And so what I want to encourage you to do is take some time, read through 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, read through it, and just list out all the descriptive words or phrases that Paul uses to say this is what love is. Write those out, and then go back through that list, or as you're writing out that list, define in your own words what each of those terms mean. Like the first one in verse 4, it says, love is patient. Right? So the first describing word is patient. What does patience mean in your own words? What's it look like to be patient with somebody else? Think about those things, write those things out, go through all those adjectives and descriptive phrases in there, and then look at that list and think through, what are some things that I need to work on? What are some areas that I need to be better at loving people? Do I need to be more patient? Do I need to be less resentful? Do I need to simply be more kind? And just think through each of those things, and what do I need to work on? How can I be a more loving person? And then how can I make love my motive in the good things that I do? And so take some time to think through those things this week. Thanks for watching.